We'd like to welcome you to Parent Conversations for the last Monday of March, and welcome spring as well, because, oh man, the weather's been great. Hope it's been great where you are. We want to thank Tim Keady for showing up again. Thank you, Tim. He is presenting our parenting series. This is week 3. We're going to talk about communication. I think I said that last week and I was ahead of myself. So we're going to talk about communication today. Thank you to the Bear River Health Department, Davis County Health Department, and the Central Utah Public Health Departments for the grants that make parent conversations possible. If you would like to participate, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and make a comment or type it in the chat, and Megan, will moderate and I will read them for you. So Tim, let's go ahead and get started, and we look forward to hearing about communication today.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you. Well, try and communicate well then. We're talking about communication. Okay, we do appreciate Megan being here with us, and we appreciate those who are attending this either in person or later on as a recording. I do include information just about myself in here so people have ideas of what we do. As far as our team, we've talked about this a little bit before. What we find is that if you look at some of the things that I do on a regular basis, most of this involves obviously communication, some form of communication. Professionally, we do all these great things. We learn to speak, hopefully, in a manner that's appropriate to our discipline and what we teach others. So see some of those things here that I do, working with homeless, veterans, harm reduction specialists, so people in substance use disorder treatment, different coalition members, suicide prevention coalitions, even hemp coalitions, certified in obviously a number of different things where we actually train and actually learn to communicate the information that we've been given. One of those things that we try and always do is make sure that we provide information that's evidence-based, appropriate, and going to be beneficial to you as a community member in whatever role you may be in. So communication becomes very important in many areas. I think that my role, really probably 80% of what I do just involves communicating information to others that they're able to use in a way that's going to be appropriate for them, for their communities, and improve the health of themselves and community members. So today, obviously, we're talking about that series. We've talked about complex interactions that support individuals and families in healthy living and fulfilling lives. Evidence-based research is used to guide our interactions. Again, talking about communication, we want to recognize the importance of that between individuals and families. Become familiar with basic communication. Be introduced to kind of family meetings and talk about those for a little bit. And we're going to create a plan to assist your family in improving their communication. So, ground rules again for the discussion. We talk about some of these things every time. Respect groups' time, person, ideas, families. Be kind. Show compassion. Share successes if you've had those. Limit disclosure of sensitive topics. Participate as you feel comfortable. Think confidentiality of groups important. We don't expect you to not talk about it, but we want you to talk about it in a way that's appropriate for the group. Not disclose people's names, information if you don't have to. Okay, we've done this before. Most of these people I think have been with us before, so we're going to worry about what we call you. But for those who are joining us maybe for the first time in the series, want to learn more about communication with families. We always ask, what do we call you? The type of family structures, location, and what you hope to gain from attending. So if you're watching this on your own, think of some of these things. So when you do participate with us, hopefully live at some point, we can get that from you. Okay, these are our areas we were talking about for the series. We talked about the introductions 1, mental and physical health was 2, importance of communication skills is today. Next week, we're talking about what we can expect, kind of human development. And these are all kind of just real kind of simple conversation starters we're trying to do, giving you information to allow you to help begin those conversations with others around these areas of parenting. Risk and protective factors, we'll talk about that in week 5. In week 6, we'll talk about resources to improve quality of life. as parents, as families. And again, when we talk about families, again, talking about general kind of family structure, and it can be a parent, can be single parent, adult parent, individuals, can be many children, can be no children, can be same-sex marriages, whatever it might be. We just want to include people as parents in a general term. So anyone who's a caregiver and a parent, that's the people we're talking about today. Okay, we did have homework about creating SMART goals for the series. Last time we talked about it. I don't know if anybody had done that. If you did do anything that you wanted to share, please place that into the chat box or go online if you want and tell us what you did. But we just want you to take some time and create those goals to address your family.
Okay, I get an F for homework for last week.
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry. Okay. All right. So people are doing some of those. Hopefully put those in the chats. That would be great. And if you haven't, we encourage you to do that. We have some handouts available online for it. Megan, we're going to say something? All right, I don't know if you're trying to speak, but I can't hear you. So we're going to go to kind of our introduction on communication. Okay, when we talk about communication, we're talking about using conversation, interaction, whatever it might be, for your individual and for family success. So mental and physical health involves communication. We don't often think of it that way, but the success of a family or of a group of people together, whatever we want to call them as a context, that communication becomes very important. If we don't have that communication, we don't understand what people are doing. We don't know what we want to do ourselves. We don't know what our activities are going to be. We obviously can run into problems when we're talking about even those hierarchy of needs, which we'll talk about in a moment. So how important is communication for a successful family? I'm asking you guys, how important do you think communication is for a successful family? What are kind of your thoughts as we start this process, talking about communication today?
Oh, okay. Tim, you still there?
Yes.
Okay, I had some tech problems with my microphone for a minute. It would not let me come in and I couldn't hear words you said either. So I apologize, but I'm back.
Okay, good. We're glad you're here.
Yes, repeat your question for me.
Okay. When we talk about communication, how do you feel that is important? And is that an important part of a successful family when we're talking about
absolutely.
Okay, absolutely. Good.
Yeah, if you can't communicate kindly and effectively, then you're going to have a really miserable experience.
That's really like the kindly, adding that kindly in there.
Yes.
Oftentimes we don't think of it that way. We don't think of how we react to things as possibly causing some disruption in the flow of communication. And it doesn't matter if you're a child, adult, youth, whatever you want to call that, that can be a difficult part of our lives if we're not careful. If anybody's ever known someone who just responds in one word sentences, that does not help. When we ask a question, someone responds yes, no, gruffly, or just, I don't want to answer any more questions. I'm just going to do it this way. You cut down the opportunities for growth, as well as the opportunities for great and good interactions. So it is a very important part of a successful family. It's something we want to encourage people to do. In communication, it sounds easy to talk with someone, or it sounds easy to tell someone, all you need to do is communicate. But we know that that's not true. Communication causes problems. Communication solves problems. So we have both sides there That's something we also don't think often about. Okay, we're gonna go something first. We're gonna go to the mental and physical health introduction, the basic human needs. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and all of you've seen this before. But when we talk about communication, if you look at what people need as a basic human need to function well, you'll see that almost all of these involve some form of communication. Okay, so self-esteem and confidence, respect of others, love, belonging, security, safety, all of that, even the physiological things you need to function and be a human being and be successful. When I say successful, I mean to live. All of these are needed. Self-actualization gets into a little bit more of that as far as being able to communicate well, thinking clearly, and doing some things with your families and loved ones or caregivers, wherever it might be. But all of these involve some form of communication to allow you to be successful. I think we don't talk a lot about that, but that's something that from a basic human need, we need to communicate. If any of you have heard of people having conversations, there was something I watched, they're beginning to use like a Zoom kind of recording that they're actually making it be able to answer questions. And they're using it to talk with some of the people who have had terrible lives or things occurred to them earlier in their lifetimes, and recording them and having people be able to ask questions. So it's been fascinating to see if by using kind of artificial intelligence, they're able to have someone ask a question and have someone who's no longer living or someone who's recorded answer that question. This obviously involves a lot of computer work and AI and all that kind of thing, but it's pretty fascinating to see what people can do to allow that communication to continue after someone's death. So some really crazy things are going on with technology to allow us to communicate more. And currently in our civilization, we're having some problems with communication, people being angry and people not listening and not understanding things. But we need to have that change. And there is work out there going on to try and help that. So again, the basic need is communication. Okay, going back to kind of our introduction for communication. It begins with parents and caregivers' first interactions. Culture, what's the culture like? Are you allowed to talk to your elders? Are you allowed to talk to your child? Are you allowed to be in the same room with a child without someone else? What are your experiences like? What were the family's experiences like? Influence of others. Who's trying to help raise your child or who's doing it? We talk about raising a child, it takes a small community, takes a city, takes a town, takes whatever to raise a child, a village. All those things are true. But what's that influence for good and for bad on that communication? And also a parent, when parents have a child, what do you do with that child? How do you interact with that child from the beginning? How do you interact with your spouse, with your loved one, with your caregiver, with your whatever from the beginning? If you're dating someone, how do you interact with that person? All of those things will have an effect on your family or on your family group as you go forward. So communication from the beginning is important. Treating each other with respect, kindness, and love. That is something that shouldn't have to be taught, but it is. It's taught. It's something that we have to understand and know that we don't yell at a child, we don't yell at an adult, we don't just always scream and yell at people. Sometimes it happens, but we have to be able to understand that's not what we want to occur. We'll talk a little more about this with culture, but can you look at a person in the eye? Is that appropriate in some cultures? Can you talk with someone by yourself if you're male or female in the same room with someone of the opposite sex? Is that acceptable? There's lots of things we look at with communication that we have to understand prior to going and trying to communicate. Now, with your child, you're hoping there aren't any set cultural or norms that have to be adhered to, but there may be. So being aware of that becomes also important. So what are the parents and caregivers' first interactions? And to me, it's from the time you meet someone and begin. So from the time you're born to the time you grow up, to the time you interact with your parents, to the time you interact with your siblings, if you have them, your family members, extended family members, whatever it might be, all the way out to the community members, to your workplace, whatever, all those are important. And that's all of those communication issues that we look at and try and change and make work for us. So going back to kind of the basics again for that, we talk about from the beginning, what do we do? Apologies. When I talk about this with people in the community, we talk about if you're going to do something, say you're an adult, you have a child and you have children. So you have a child, you're raising that child, you're talking to that child all the way through, you're reading, you're interacting, all those things in a positive way, we hope. The child's interacting with you. How do you make sure that you're doing things correctly? And in most cases, most human beings just talk to their children. It's something we expect and we just understand is going to happen with that child. We're trying to care for that child, love that child, and have it grow up to be successful. So when we're talking with that child, the child's a little bit older. So when I'm saying older, I'm saying it's, beyond the few months old as you're talking to them. They get a little bit older and going beyond that, as we start going into possibly as they're the toddler years and they're starting to interact with you more and more. We talk about using positive communication behaviors. The smiles that you give a child, the smiles that you get back from that child, whatever it might be. Behaviorally, we need to be able to make sure that we're not always, in a yelling or screaming match with that child and trying to make that child do something that they can't or don't want to do. So we talk about using role play as they get a little bit older. I'm saying the toddler years again. How do we make that work? How do we do things that are appropriate? How do we do it with our family? So think about major communication and modeling communication behaviors. Role playing is one of the things we use. We also use active listening. We have an appropriate response. And we simplify the actions for the age of the person we're talking with. And I see Lori there too. Hi, Lori. So we're talking about communicating well. There's some things we just want to begin looking at. So again, a child is very young, to be very different as far as active listening, and appropriate responses, but simplifying those actions for the age. How do we respond? If the child can answer one word, yes, no, whatever it might be, asking that child still is appropriate. Communicating with them and speaking with them consistently will help engage them more and more in that process of learning. And so communication really is a huge part of learning for our families, our loved ones, and those who are part of our groups, no matter what we're doing. So kind of just general conversation, information, active listening, appropriate responses, simplify actions for the age, excuse me. What's the culture? What's the experience? What's the influence of others? What's that going to have on the communication level that occurs? What are communication styles? We have people that sign, we have people who use different languages, we have people that cannot speak. We have all different ways of communicating. Talk about body language, we talk about all of those things become important in our communications. Okay. Simple definition for communication: imparting or exchanging of information or news. I like to put the appropriate exchange of information. Yelling and screaming at someone is not what I consider appropriate, but we're getting information, so we're exchanging information or news. So communication, synonyms: transmission, imparting, conveying, reporting, presenting. So communication definition is really imparting or exchanging information or news. It's a simple definition, but works well. Okay, so going back to kind of what we would like to see people do with communication, we talk about using verbal and nonverbal communication. Talk about looking in the eye as appropriate to culture, sending and receiving skills, being interested, sitting facing forward towards person, be alert to speaker. So there's just some general things we can talk about. But if I were to ask you about verbal and nonverbal communication, what would you tell me about that? Nonverbal communication, how important is that, do you think?
So you're asking what nonverbal communication looks like. Is that what you're basically wanting to know?
Yeah, what you,
Yeah.
and yeah, how important might that be?
Oh, extremely important. Body language says a lot. If somebody is, if they're engaged with you and they're rolling their eyes, it doesn't matter if what they're saying sounds nice, if they're rolling their eyes or they've got their arms crossed across their chest and you can tell that they're not happy with you, that sends a totally different message than what their words might be attempting to say.
Very true. And that's
Or
what we
they're-
find. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead,
I
Laurie.
was gonna say the same thing if they're harumphing or just giving you their body attitude, like, well, I don't have to do my chores, and they have a frown on their face or whatever, it really sends a different message than what they think they're doing.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we see a lot of people oftentimes what they're saying, especially now with all the Zoom stuff we do, at least with me, a lot of people will say all these great things, but I'm watching them and they're like sitting back in their chair and they're like, this is good. Got their eyes partially closed and I'm going, okay, thank you guys for participating in this meeting. It's like, yeah, you're saying all the right things, but your actions aren't showing me that's what's really happening. And with children especially, children can have a hard time, I believe, hiding their body language because they really, most of them are without guile and don't have, they aren't trying to mislead people. They're just trying to talk about what they're doing or getting information back from people, no matter how old they may be. So I think that being aware of what's going to happen when you're talking with someone is important. So just give people some basic things when they're looking at communication levels. Again, looking at people straight if you can, trying to keep them. We talk about sending and receiving skills, providing that smile as people are talking to you, that subtle head nod if you understand what they're saying. Kind of people can see the expressions in your eyes, even your face. If you're questioning some of the things that they're saying. So we talk about being able to read that. And that's something that's changed a little bit as I've done this for many years. I'm working with people in different settings. We have a lot more people that may have some spectrum, so autism, those types of things, they're on a spectrum or whatever, and we have to try and communicate with them. Even ADD, ADHD, sometimes that can disrupt the ability to communicate well and to understand some of the subtle cues that we learn throughout our lifetime. And that's something that makes it a little bit more of a challenge. There's some children I know that do have ADD and ADHD out there that with parents that are having some difficulties currently. And it's just not here, it's everywhere in the world. Essentially, we have better understanding of how to help those children and how to help even adults now. And we have many people that I know are being diagnosed in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s with something that they never knew they had, but it began to make sense to them because their communication skills, they had difficulty throughout their lifetime. So being aware of that has become very important. So talking to your doctors about that, if you have questions or concerns for your children, becomes a great thing to do. So we tell people, as you begin teaching someone about communication, whether it's a child, whoever it might be, or someone new to the country even, having them sitting straight, looking at that person, talking to them, trying to get an idea of what they're saying and understand it. And we talk about being alert to the speaker, being alert to them, and being able to talk well as they're talking to them becomes a great skill. So if you're sitting kind of to the side, whatever it might be, this way, to me, it's showing a form of disrespect. And we try not to do that if we can with people we're communicating with. Also, people can show anger, hostility, all that kind of stuff happens. But trying to be aware of that becomes important too. And how do you tell if someone's becoming irate at you or just was mad about what they're talking about? That's some other skills we try and learn for verbal and nonverbal communication. So we talk about threatening activities and all those kind of things. And in general, when we talk about techniques for avoiding misunderstanding, we talk about the clarifying, asking those other questions to clarify. Please clarify what you just said so I understand it better. Asking those questions again, being specific. Why don't you understand it? Work with that person to get a better understanding of what's happening, what they did. And then paraphrasing back. well, you just said that in the event of this, I'm going to help you do this. So getting some of that done as you're talking with someone becomes important. And teaching your children to do that becomes important also. We talk about avoiding misunderstanding. With a child, you can say, hey, Missy, I didn't want to confuse you with that. So I'm going to talk to you about this now. I'm going to clarify that, and then let her ask questions also back to you. Be specific in your conversation with them, and then paraphrasing maybe again what they said back to you. So you have a good interaction going back and forth between people. So to avoid misunderstandings, clarify, ask questions, be specific, and then paraphrase back that information. Okay, speaking to family members at approximately correct developmental stage is very important. We all know this, but how many of you have had, I won't even ask you this, but I know I have had times where I've just been exasperated by a child that can't even speak yet. I'm like, come on, you gotta do this. I know you understand what I'm saying. This is what we're trying to do. Could you just please do this for me? And sometimes it's lightheartedly, sometimes it's like, oh my goodness, you haven't eaten, you haven't slept, you haven't done whatever. So being aware of that, I know that my communication sometimes isn't always going to be correct with that child. So I learned to be very specific in what I'm trying to do. We've got a child that can't speak, then we go, okay, how can I make you feel better? How can I help you? And sometimes a child can point to something or have a little better understanding. You may even think, maybe I'll do some things with that child. We talk about developmental stages. We have some links here if you want those, and you can look up some things online if you like, of what's appropriate for a child, adolescent, adult, senior, those kind of things. What can they do? Communication-wise, even thinking and processing information. What can they do? What's appropriate for them to look at as far as that communication level goes? So for a child, obviously a child has very different communication levels. And also that same 5-year-old versus your neighbor's 5-year-old versus your cousin's 5-year-old versus your daughter's 5-year-old, whatever it might be, are going to react differently to the same impetus and to the same input. So being aware of that becomes important also. Again, it comes from context, comes from where they're raised, becomes from all of those things. Cultural, all that becomes an issue when we're talking about communication with a child. We don't assume that every child has that same level of information to start. And that becomes important to think about too. We get into adolescence, the preteen, teens, young adults, whatever you want to call them. Oftentimes they will have their own subtle languages. They'll change language a little bit. They'll do some things differently. Make things be a little unusual. Talk to you about things maybe in a way that is subtly inappropriate. And you have to correct them back to the right things that are appropriate. So adolescent times is the time for that person, child, male, female, non-binary, whatever it might be, that person is actually trying to get information that will help them identify their world. Don't want to think about it that way, but an adolescent is still exploring and trying to change their world in some way, or is to understand the world in a better way for themselves. Same thing happens with an adult also. Developmental stages for adults can be different too. To me, an adult's not fully developed till probably 26, 27 years old at least. Sometimes I say until about 30, depending on what that adult has done in the past or is doing currently, and depending on their culture and their lives and what they've experienced beforehand. So communication with someone that may be an adult at 18, we consider them an adult, or 21, may or may not be what we want to look at as being appropriate. We may have to reduce that information down a little bit for that child or for that adult to be able to understand what we're talking about. And then senior adults, again, being aware that sometimes as people become senior adults, some of their memories may begin to fade. They may have a little lack of understanding in their communication. They may not be able to speak as well as we'd like to see them speak. They may have some deficits due to injury, accident, illness, whatever it might be, or even dental areas being worked on.
Tim, can I throw something in here when you're done?
Go ahead, sure.
Okay, I've only experienced this recently. There are people with, I'm gonna call them personality disorders.
Mhm.
And sometimes, no matter how hard you try to effectively, kindly communicate, it's just not gonna be reciprocated.
Yep.
That's all I'm gonna say about that.
Okay.
Yep, and then, Laurie said, even teachers can use this. My daughter has been struggling with an assignment at school because her teacher assumed she knew how to use Google Slides. So never assume.
That's right. I mean, there's a little thing you say, you make a what out of someone if you assume, right?
Yes,
So we have to be careful with that, but I appreciate that input. Thank you, guys. That's good. And when we start adding in mental health issues with people, because a lot of what I do involves mental health. And we do have a lot of people with behavioral health issues. And you're exactly right. Communication with some of those people is basically impossible.
yes,
One thing I will say though, in most cases though, if you keep it very, very simple, and you try and do it in a way that's, again, we're talking about building trust over a period of time, sometimes years, to talk to someone like that. You can sometimes break through, but it comes at a big cost for them and for you. And if they're not willing to put in the work either, it becomes difficult. And for me, if they're not medicated in some way, or if they do need medication, they're not taking it, or they're acting out, that becomes difficult for the person to communicate. So hopefully nobody's really going through that, but that is difficult in all different areas. And I think that's something that we don't often talk about also. A lot of people that we have in our community, even right here, have mental health concerns that are significant. And if someone is hearing voices, you really can't help that person very well. And in some cases, it can make it a little bit dangerous for you. So always be aware and be careful that you need to help that person. And if you have questions about communication, you can talk to me later about that, or we can give you more information about that, how to kind of balance that with being basically, a lot of people say, well, I can't be a friend or a family member of this person. It's like, well, you still can, but you have to do these things. There's some certain skills we teach people to use. So if people need that, let us know too. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to talk about just really quickly for communication, because we're talking about families and groups of people, talk about having a scheduled weekly meeting. How many of you, just show by hands if you can, or if you want to, how many of you actually meet as a family once a week?
well, since it's just me right now,
You meet quite often. That's good.
that's right.
Hey, more than once.
Catherine Ellis says in the chat that they do.
Good.
No, but we did at a time and it was very beneficial, especially for calendaring, to know
Yeah.
what everyone had that week.
Yep, very good. Believe it or not, that's one of the things that when we teach, we have strengthening families programs we teach from Iowa State. And one of the biggest things that they promote and that we promote when we do that, because we know it also works for our groups, is that weekly meeting. But we do the meeting a little bit differently. We have the meeting set up, obviously it's going to review important family and individual activities, calendar and all that, people support and all that. But what we do is we also have people take turns leading those meetings. We take minutes, we have somebody keep track of what's being said, giving input, providing ideas, etc. And the children take turns leading it also. So the children will do it, and they have big input into what happens. As soon as they're able to do it, getting them involved becomes important. And one of the things we also try to do is we try and make it be not a negative kind of thing. That meeting does a couple of different things. Obviously, it gets people together, but also can open up some lines of communication that may be strained or something may have happened during that week. Allows us to get some people an opportunity to speak. And many children, especially even some adults, would like just that opportunity to go around a circle and say, okay, what do you have to add this week? Anything you'd like to talk to us about? It gives children an opportunity to talk with people beyond just themselves or beyond a sort of same peer group as children, younger children, but begins them thinking and talking to adults, and kind of thinking that through. And adults can, again, kind of lead them and saying, okay, how are you doing? What's happening? And, oh, if you have a question about this, we can talk about it in this way. If you have something difficult to bring up in the family meeting, how would you bring that up? And you can model that behavior with that with that child or those people. And that's something we don't do very often either. Many of the people that we work with oftentimes have never spoken to a group. They've only spoken to their children's friends or whatever, or people in their family. So we try and give that opportunity to people in a different way. And this, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints culture, that's something that is done quite often. People are asked to speak. People do different things. They have family home evenings, all those different things that happen here. But back east, it's very different. We don't have that. People don't have often those types of things, opportunity. It's something that when you look at different cultures again, what's that culture like? And different cultures we have here, even Cache Valley, some of those cultures are different in how they interact with adults. And some children now are not encouraged to speak. So again, having an opportunity to have a scheduled weekly meeting becomes important. Yes, somebody's going to say something there.
I do want to say something. I like that idea of the scheduled meeting, and it kind of sparked an idea to add to one of our Discovery Family Adventures. But I know that we do have a Discovery Family Adventure that is, I think it's titled Public Speaking. So if you don't have the opportunity to, if your children don't have the opportunity to do that, then check out the Discovery Family Adventures and check out Public Speaking.
That's fantastic. That's perfect. That's what we talk about, all these opportunities for people to learn, right? How can we learn? I know when I was in college, we had to take a public speaking course. One of the English electives or whatever, we had to do that. And I know that there's some opportunities in schools, high schools, elementary schools, whatever, where people are doing that, again, trying to get that information out to allow people to understand that, speaking up becomes important, and we have to be able to think clearly and also be able to put things together and speak loudly to a person or to a group of people that we want to interact with. And again, just something good to learn, and public speaking obviously is an important part of that. So thanks for that.
Yeah, there's a little bit more here. It's been, I think they've got some data that shows that people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying. And I used to be one of those people, and I grew up in the LDS culture where I think the first talk I ever gave in front of somebody was when I was probably 10, and it was mortifying. And then even in high school I had the problem, but the more I've continued to do it, and I took a public speaking class in college as well, and I've gotten to the point where it doesn't freak me out anymore. Is it fun? No. But once the prep's over and I actually start speaking, I'm fine. So I've counted myself very blessed to have overcome that horrific fear that I used to have. It used to make me physically sick.
Well, yeah, that's right. It's not unusual. And I think that's something that even back east, when we were back east, when we had different positions I was in, we were asked to join things like Toastmasters. We couldn't speak well in front of people. One of the things that I did was actually kind of like the public relations person for a company I was in case we had emergencies. And so my company offered to send me to learn how to speak in public, which I thought was kind of cool. So there are opportunities to do it. So taking that becomes important, but giving your child a chance to do it in a meeting is a great way to do it with someone that they're comfortable with. They feel safe. You can encourage them, you can hold them and get them started. That's just something to start. So that's great. We don't want people to have that, visceral reaction to being asked to speak and do something in front of other people.
Right.
That's why some of the things we talked about even today, in our super smart goals, part of the goal is to stand and talk about what you're going to do in front of others. So we start talking about that from the beginning, of how we can provide good resources to our family and loved ones and others. So,
Emily joined us fairly recently, and she said that public speaking was her favorite class in college. And Emily, somehow I can see that about you.
yeah. So it sounds like she has good speaking skills. That's great. All right, so the weekly meetings, take turns, try that with your children, whatever you can. And beginning the meeting with a positive action that occurred during the week. So going into the meeting, and everyone provides something positive that happened before you start your meeting. So you go in, you have the person, whoever's going to be leading it that week, say welcome, whatever, and you say, okay, what happened this week that was great for us, or that was good for you, whatever, and start that way. And believe it or not, just that simple change as you walk in the door of a positive action can actually turn a meeting that was going to be negative into a positive meeting. And so if you keep these family meetings kind of set up that way, it will help you have better interaction, better discussions, and more communication with the family members. Again, just something to think about as you think about these. If you have a family or loved ones you want to do that with. All right.
So I just learned a secret then. That's why some of these Zoom meetings that I get to attend, they say, okay, introduce yourself and tell us one good thing that's happened to you this week. Okay, I know the secret now.
Yep, that's the secret. That's what we do. That's what everybody tries to do now, because again, online, right? You can't sit next to that person and see their body language necessarily, but you can ask them about that. You'll see smiles begin, right, in the meetings. You do that. So those secrets, sorry, I let the secret out of the bag. Sorry about that.
Oh, I'm going to use it.
Okay, here we go for communication. We're just go over, because I do a lot of stuff with SAMHSA, substance and alcohol, mental health, substance, whatever it is now, that I work with, which basically allows us to do substance use disorder training, mental health training, suicide prevention. We've got conversation goals that they recommend for you to try. There's basically on drugs and alcohol, but it's got good information, just as we talk about anything that can be a positive or negative thing in a conversation with our communication. Showing, for example, you disapprove of underage drinking or drug use, show you care about your child's health, wellness, and success, show you're a good source of information about alcohol and other drugs, show you're paying attention and will discourage risky behaviors, build your child's skills and strategies for avoiding underage drinking and drug use. So this is just an example of one conversation goal skills set up by a group that is trying to reduce drug and alcohol use among families and loved ones. So again, you'll see it's just something that's a little different. We're talking about communication. So I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the communication stuff that is available and out there. But I like this one because it shows you care about your child's health, wellness, and success. Number 2, I think that's really important. And the 4th, you're paying attention and discourage risky behaviors, building skills. So paying attention as an adult, as a parent, as a caregiver, becomes very, very important as children grow and learn. And so being present, right? If we can do that, we actually can solve a lot of the problems we have with family members and loved ones by being there for them to help them. Okay, I did this just because I was looking at some of these things we're going over the information for parent conversations. And we do talk a lot about what's meant by age-appropriate activities. There are some CDC developmental milestones you can look up if you want. It has positive parenting tips. Talks about middle childhood, being 6 to 8 years old, and then teen, 15 to 17. And these CDC tips are actually available online. You can look them up and get information about what would be appropriate or inappropriate for that age. We're talking about communication, we're talking about independence, we're talking about basically as a child grows, what is important for them to be doing from a physical and mental standpoint. Okay, so one thing we're talking about really quick, build communication independence, set appropriate goals, what to expect from your child, different ages, create clear, simple steps, provide easy to follow instructions as you're getting ready to listen to that person speak and help them to speak well. Model activity, demonstrate as you're talking, use first then followed by a disliked activity. So do a like followed by a dislike kind of thing. Give a child a choice. What do they want? They're just all ideas of how to get them speaking with you. Use encouraging words and correct with kindness. So as you're building that communication independence in the younger children, having those goals set appropriately obviously is important. And older children, for teens, again, teach accountability, try to stay connected, good decision-making, problem-solving skills, compliment, be specific and accurate, don't exaggerate, they can tell. nurture skills and interests, encourage their talents. So again, just in general, some things that we can do for teens, teaching them about hard work and reaching goals as part of our communication skills. So talking about some of these things can allow you to build that communication relationship with them in an appropriate manner. And you understand what kind of things you can ask for also with some of these simple lists. Okay, general problem solving skills for everyone. So my communication is not going well. But
Tim, before we
after
go on,
listening-
can I read something from Emily really quick?
Sure.
Okay, I might have missed this. It was back, we were talking about the meetings and sharing positive things. She said she's involved in a youth group where they oversee some meetings with the youth. And sometimes we go around the circle and share our quote unquote peaches and pits from the week. She's wondering, I know it's good to point out the positive things that happen throughout the week. Is there a benefit in pointing out a negative thing as well? Or is it encouraged to strictly focus on those positive things?
I guess in like a weekly meeting that you're having on a regular basis, we'd rather have you have positive things to start and continue that. And then, I mean, obviously, if it's something that's going to affect the entire family and entire group, you might want to bring it up too. It can be brought up. What we find oftentimes, though, when people start adding those negative aspects of their week into it, it delves into really being negative instead of being a positive experience for most of the people in that meeting. So again, just being aware of that, as long as it doesn't overtake that. We talk about always having, two positives to one negative. You also look at it that way if you'd like. But if it's something that's really significant, I would say you have another meeting. You say, we're going to finish this meeting and we're going to have a meeting later, or I don't know, maybe tomorrow we're going to talk about something that's a little bit difficult that's come up this week. So keeping this one meeting is a real positive experience for the children and for the family members and loved ones and my caregivers. That becomes important, I think. And then adding that second meeting if necessary to discuss further if you can. If you can't, obviously, then you have to weigh that and use the kind of the two positives to a negative if you can, if that's
Thank
helpful.
you.
Okay, so active listening, communication, dependability, research, analysis, creativity, decision-making, team building. All these are problem-solving skills we all want to have. So I think when we talk about communication is something that we're trying to work on as a group. It's something that I think even myself, I'm always looking at better ways to communicate and better ways to do things that are going to help my people I work with and also myself. How can I be more clear? And one of the things I get, if I'm speaking to my wife and I'm not speaking technically or doing something, she'll say, can you clarify that for me? Because my acronym that I talk about all the time is something that she may not understand or know. And so being aware of that sometimes also is important, because I have like 3 or 4 different acronyms and vocabulary lists in my head, whether it's medical, whether it's through EMS, whether it's through substance use disorders, whether it's through mental health. My acronyms and my idea in my brain that people understand is very different than what other people may think and understand. So again, being aware of my communication skills becomes important, and how I can continue to adapt and change that and make sure I'm not leaving people out or making people confused by what I'm saying. These are some of the family things we talk about when if you're in those meetings, you're doing things. We talk about simple items to teach people if you can. Vaping, drugs, and alcohol. COVID-19, talk about health promoting behaviors. Social skills, saying no, societal norms, and ethical and moral behavior, pro-social involvement in behaviors, and be resilient, adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or stress. So it's simple kind of things that we all try and work on often. But in our meetings, we can start teaching our family how to be more resilient, how to be able to communicate that to others. How does this make you feel? How can I make you feel better with just my communication skill? Okay, that's it for this. Any questions, any comments?
If you'd like to make a comment or ask a question, now's a good time. Post it in the chat or unmute yourself.
Yeah, and the homework, just so we know as we're waiting for people to respond, the homework again, we've talked about review your SMART skills, SMART goals, I'm sorry, and add communication skills. What can you add communication-wise to skills? Yeah, Lori. Okay.
I had a comment / question. I missed the other lectures in the series, but I was going to ask, I've heard in the past through parent conversations that we shouldn't bring up confrontational conversations at the dinner table. So I'm wondering, I like to do a lot of our planning / calendaring at the dinner table when we're together. And we don't have older kids, so it's mostly 3 adults and 1 toddler. So I like to discuss these at the dinner table, but I'm also wondering, could that be discouraged because you want to keep it an uplifting experience dinner together and you don't want anything confrontational to come up? Or do you just do the part of the meeting that's not confrontational, it's just lightly planning? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're right. That's interesting because sometimes when you're together as a family, it's a comfortable time and you can bring things up that are difficult. So that's part of the concern for many people is how do I do it in a way that's going to be comfortable? But when we're doing just these specific kind of family meetings, I would say do the meeting, and then, like I said, keep it very positive. And then if you do have those more difficult conversations, maybe taking that away from the table, because being at the table, sometimes that can become difficult because then people begin to associate being at the table with having difficult conversations, which isn't a negative thing always, but we're talking about eating at different stages of life. That can discourage eating, discourage possible eating disorders later on as people get older. So we want to kind of separate that if we can from actually sitting at the table. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So again, I know many people do all kinds of weird things. My family did what I consider weird things sometimes. We were always taught growing up, we had 1 meal a week where we actually sat in the dining room and ate as if we were at a restaurant, and did that on a regular basis. So we had 3 boys in my family. My mother wanted us to grow up civilized, right? So we know how to use forks and different plates and all that kind of stuff. So that's how we did things. And to us, it was very normal, but people coming into that for us thought that was very weird and strange. So again, what you do as a family is up to you. It's just a matter of what works for you. But simple things like, conversations with our groups and doing things weekly and making it be a positive experience for children so they want to participate. That's how to get them involved. And then those other conversations that become more difficult are easier because you have set that precedence already. And they know they can still expect to have that as a positive thing later on, but this negative one is going to be occurring at a different time.
I like that you guys got to have a formal dinner weekly. Laurie had a question. She said, do you have any great books on communication?
There's actually a bunch of things out there, but the question becomes communication at what level? So we talk about, is it with children, is it with adolescents, with adults? There's lots of books out there. We can give you a list though. We've got some books. I just hesitate to give you any specific because there's so much information out there now. And in some ways, I'm finding that we're making it too hard. Communication is really about interaction and having trust and faith and love in that person you're talking to. And that's something that when we start adding all these research-based things into it, because there's so many different positive psychology things, negative psychology, substance use stuff, all stuff that I work with, it really gets a little confusing after a while. But I'll give you just some general books that would be in general good communication skills. I tell people really, read things that you like about families and about communication and about love and about whatever it might be, and then kind of develop your own style based on that. But we'll give you information. We can do that without a problem.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, all right. Well, if Tim, did you share your email before that people can contact you directly, or would you rather have them go through us?
I did. Actually, it's in the front, I believe. It's all in front of the stuff.
And I know I've seen it in weeks past. So if you have a question specifically for Tim, you can email him directly.
Yeah. Tim's not here. I think it's on here somewhere. Maybe I took it off. I don't know. Let's see.
Oh, you went through it really fast. I didn't see it, but
Yeah, all right, it's tim.keady@usu.edu.
yeah. And Keady is, you can see it on the screen, Keady.
Yep.
Yeah.
So actually,
Okay.
if I put up front, maybe we'll try to fly through this thing again, but my email, so Tim, yeah, just use tim.keady@usu.edu.
Perfect. Well, this has been my favorite in the series so far. I don't know about anybody else, but I like to talk and I like to learn about positive communication. So
Okay, well, hopefully that's helpful. Again, this is just really a touch on communication. So I hope you look more into that if you want. You find things that you like to do and talk about it with others. And I appreciate you being here. Next week, we're going to talk about what we can expect with human development as part of the parent series. Thank you guys very much.
sounds great. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
Okay, take care, guys. Thank you very much.